2023. I'm Chuck House. I direct the ACM Awards Archive Project, and I have Dr.Yale Patt of University of Texas, and 1,500 IEEE awards, and the Eckert-Mockley ACM IEEE Award, and also the Carl Karlstrom Award, among other things. So we're pleased to have you, Yale, and we'll cover a few things here. You had a terrific interview with Derek Chow at your university for ACM about 7 years ago. Remember that?
I certainly do. They cut, so they printed it actually in the communications, but they cut out about 75% of it. But the actual video was pretty much the interview. Derek, I know Derek very well, so he had that advantage of knowing what questions to ask me.
Oh my God, he zeroed in on so many. I watched the 3 hours, and it was great material, and he clearly knew the questions and places to poke you at, so it was great. And I'll poke a few of those, but we don't need to repeat a lot of that. You know, I mean, that's on record. It's an ACM file, so I'll just try and augment if that's okay.
Whatever you wish to do is fine. Feel free to poke.
Okay, well, I will. First of all, you've got the Texas, the TACC there that I think
that's right.
Dan Stanzione runs that, doesn't he?
Yes, we do. We have TAC. In fact, we were in the same building with TAC a few years ago. I guess Boise was probably the original director of it, although I suspect other people like Tinsley Oden probably had a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, I talked to Tinsley about it, and he said yes, he did.
Yeah,
he had a lot to do with everything at Texas.
Yeah. You know, Tinsley passed away last weekend.
I did not know that. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's we seem to be losing our giants at Texas. John Goodenough passed away in June.
I did
at the age of 100.
Yeah, I'd heard that.
And now Tinsley's gone. So I guess the rest of us will just have to scramble harder or something.
There you go. It's that's one reason we do these, is so we capture all this. We just had you're probably not a SIGGRAPH attendee very often, but we just had the 50th anniversary of SIGGRAPH, and we had a bunch of the stalwarts there: Albie Ray Smith and Andy Van Dam and
wow.
Don Greenberg and they all waxed poetic on stage. It was and they even knew me. I couldn't believe it.
So Albie Ray once told me that I inspired him to stay in school and get a PhD.
Is that right?
Because he was in the engineering library where they have all our dissertations.
Right.
And he was struggling with he was an electrical engineering student like I was, and he was struggling with whether it was the right place for him. He came upon my thesis and he said, "Hell, I can do this." And so he stayed in school and got his PhD a couple of years later. So I love my claim to fame, inspiring Albie Ray.
Well, that's not a bad one right there. And you've got 2 Turing Award winners on campus. I didn't realize Bob Metcalf was pretending to be a professor at UTexas, but he is.
No comment. and yeah, so Bob got as you know, the Turing Award this year.
Right. I've known Bob for a long time. Actually, my wife and I have both known Bob. And we walked up to him at the dinner and reminded him of a meeting we'd had in Camden, Maine, I don't know, 20 years ago. And Jenny was enthused. The fall color was brilliant. And she, "Why don't we get a place here, honey?" And he wrapped his arm, she's 5'2", he's like 6'5", and he wrapped his arm around her. He said, "Honey, come on up here in February and let's talk."
Right.
So then he whips out his $1 million check. that he got for the Turing Award. I'd never seen $1 million check. So I've got a photograph of him and my wife with that damn check. he said they could have given it to me 20 years ago, but it wouldn't have been worth $10,000, which is what Feigenbaum always complained about. So what
$1
I want
million.
to do, go ahead.
No, I was just saying $1 million check. Yeah, I've never seen $1 million check either. But if you want to write one to me, that I would, I'd be glad to cash it.
You would, huh? Yeah, well, it wouldn't do you much good if I wrote it.
So I remember. So here's a funny anecdote to you, showing the quickness of one of the guys in our community, John Hennessy. We were having an argument about something in his book. And I said, look, I know what I'm talking about. I know the guy who actually did the work. He said, no, I know the guy who actually did the work. I said, well, how much you want to bet? He said, $5. I said, okay, you're on. And so then we got a third independent person who acknowledged that I was right and John was not. So John took out his wallet and handed me $5. And I said, John, I think I'm going to frame this. He said, well, in that case, let me write you a check.
I love it. I love it. Who was the person?
So it had to do with the first Motorola 68,000 chip. And one of John's students, I guess, was responsible for the ISA. But the guy who actually did the circuits for that chip was Nick Tredenik. And Nick was a good friend of mine, and so I knew a lot about, what he was doing. And the argument was whether or not it was two-level microprogramming or one-level. And it was one level, but the way Nick did it, one could be confused and think it was two-level. And that's what the book said, that it was two-level. I said, John, you got to get your facts straight. It wasn't two-level, it was one-level. And he said, no, I know the guy who was responsible, but he was talking about the ISA, which is a higher level, and not the nitty-gritty actual circuits. And I knew Nick, who did the circuits, and then I can't remember who it was, but somebody who had some exposure to that chip said, no, Yale's right. And John said, well, in that case, let me write you a check if you're going to frame it. And I thought that was quick and typical of John's brilliance.
John is awfully quick, no question. But yeah. I can remember Nick talking about that at Asilomar several times, and so that shouldn't have been a secret to John, for crying out loud.
Huh?
But
I don't know. But the textbook, Hennessy and Patterson said it was two-level, and of course it wasn't. The microcode came in. And then part of the microcode operated in the data path, and part of the microcode figured out what the next microinstruction was, and they diverged on the chip and went their separate ways, which was pretty much the way we did things back then. And for some reason, John or Dave, somebody was confused, thinking that it was really two levels, and it wasn't. It was two things being done at the same time.
They also had built a look-ahead function into that chip. Do you remember that?
I mean, into the Motorola chip?
Yeah. Maybe that was.
So this is the first I've heard of that. No, I did not know that at all.
Yeah, it had a look-ahead register that you could, basically, I wouldn't call it branch prediction, but it was that kind of idea. And we decoded that. I ran the logic analyzer group at HP, and we figured that out and called to ask about it. And they said, "How can you tell?"
Yeah. So I never heard of that before. So was it a register that just was used for the next load the next instruction while they were waiting for the current instruction to continue processing?
Exactly.
Yeah, no. So that would have been around a long time before the 68,000.
I think this was the 6800 as I think about it. So yeah, it had been around at least that long.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to you mentioned your mother coming over as a 20-year-old, and you had a fantastic story about her three rules of life.
Uh-huh.
And you also mentioned in that context that Warren Spahn was one of your heroes. So
Yeah, Warren Spahn was so back in those days, there were only 16 major league teams, and most of the cities had two teams. So Boston, where I grew up, had the Red Sox and the Braves. And I was a Braves fan, probably because my father was a Braves fan. And baseball was everything to, a 10-year-old kid.
oh yeah,
In fact, my career was going to be to play first base for the Boston Braves. And my father, took me to Braves Field multiple times. And Spahn was, in fact, the thing was Spahn and Sane and Pray for Rain, because they
that's
only
right.
had two pitch. They
That's
only had
right.
two pitchers that were worth a damn, and Warren Spahn was one of them. And I of course, saw him pitch multiple times. I saw them play the Cardinals. Stan Musial was the big gun on the Cardinals back in those days, and they broke my heart, of course, when they moved to Milwaukee.
Oh, I know. And Eddie Matthews has been around too. I mean, you probably weren't.
That's correct. So Eddie
Yeah.
Matthews was a third baseman when they were in Boston.
Yeah.
Hank Aaron was not. Hank Aaron came up when they were in Milwaukee.
Right, but Eddie was around, and
Eddie Matthews, that's right. In fact, he took the place of Bob Elliott, who was their big clutch hitter when Elliott retired. And yeah, he was with the Braves in Boston, Milwaukee, and then in Atlanta.
So you had no truck with the Red Sox.
That's correct. Although years later, I became a big fan of Ted Williams. And for several reasons, he told it like it was. He didn't mince words. And I've always been a big fan of telling it like it was. Also, he put in 2 tours of duty in the armed forces. He was in World War II, and then he came back to the Red Sox, and then he spent 2 years during the Korean conflict. And those 5 years, he would have accomplished a lot in baseball, but he saw his duty, and he went and did it. So no, I became a big fan of Ted Williams later on.
Well, he was my boyhood hero, and I like Dom DiMaggio too. He was probably the best fielder he ever saw, but his brother was the hitter. And so
that is correct.
well,
They actually had another brother, Vince DiMaggio, by the way.
That is true. And they all 3 played, didn't they? Major.
I'm sorry?
I think all 3 were in the majors, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. No, that's correct. Joe played for the Yankees, as you know, Dom for the Red Sox. I don't remember who Vince DiMaggio played for, actually, but pretty prolific family when it came to Major League Baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, you just provided kind of a segue there, and that's to your Army days, because you went out of your way to make sure you wanted to serve your country. And I heard that story a little bit, and you got a deferment till June 11th. Your classes were done June 10th, something like that. But the story I wanted to follow up on is that's where you encountered Glenn Culler for the first time.
That's right. No, Glenn Culler, I'm a big fan of Glenn Culler. I thought that he never got the credit that he should have gotten for all the stuff that he did. Yeah, so I strongly believe in national service. Doesn't have to be the military. It could be the Peace Corps or Teach for America. But I'm not a fan of these people who think they're too good to serve their country. And I actually would not have had to go in the Army if I didn't want to. I had 3 ways I would have been absolutely deferred and not have to go in. When I went in, they were not drafting people who were married, and I was married by then. They were not drafting people that had technical deferments, and I had a PhD from Stanford in double E, and so they would not have taken me. And my eyesight was pretty bad in those days. At some point, it got so bad that I ended up having cataracts removed and replaced by good lenses of the correct focal length. And so now I can see like almost 20/20. But at that time, I don't know how much you know about, if I say diopter, I don't know whether that means anything to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my eyesight was minus 13 diopters.
Oh, wow.
And that would have kept me out of the service also. But my feeling was that we all should go in for 2 years. And so I did. I was lucky in the, you tell the story about the, I was teaching at Cornell and they called the general and he said, okay, when does the academic year end? And they said June 10th. And so he said, fine, he can report on June 11th. Well, that general made a note in my 201 file so that instead of being sent to Vietnam, I was sent to the Army Research Office. And I spent my after I got through with my boot camp, I spent the rest of my 2 years in the Army Research Office. And my job, a good part of my job was to be on that feasibility team that was developing the ARPANET. So as I say, I got plenty of tutoring from Glenn Culler and Lenny Kleinrock back in those days. And for me, it was fantastic because, I knew nothing about communication theory when I started. And I guess I could have gotten a certificate in communication theory from those two guys.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So a little sidebar there. I went down to Santa Barbara to run a little company. And in 95, I guess it was. And I'm asking people, and it's a company of like 30 people. And I'm asking, where did this company start? It's a company called Spectron Microsystems. And they said, oh, a guy named Culler started it. And I said, not Glenn Culler. Yep, Glenn Culler. I'd met him years earlier at a couple of conferences, long before he had his stroke. And they said, but he's disabled now, I could have you meet him, but he's pretty much non-communicative. And we went to lunch and he was able to say a few things. And I got really enchanted by what he had to say, wound up nominating him for the National Medal of Technology.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I did see him once. I guess I was giving one of these, distinguished lectures at Santa Barbara, and they took me to lunch, and I saw Roger Wood, and I said, "Have you seen Glenn lately?" And he said, "Yeah, here he is, standing right next to me. He already had the stroke, and it was like a different person,
Yeah.
Before the stroke, he was full of life." A pure mathematician, PhD, but one of the best engineers I've ever met.
He was phenomenal as an engineer.
Yeah.
So let me share a story that you may not have heard. So he wins the national medal, and Bill Clinton called him. I happened to be in Dave Culler's office. Actually, I was in Larry Rowe's office, and Dave Culler came running in and said, "My dad just won the national medal." And he said, but the problem was it took me 20 minutes to know what he'd won, because he said the president called me and I said, was it the president of Rotary, or was it the president of the university, or the president of the church? And he said it took 20 minutes for him to get out the idea that it was the president of the United States, right?
Right.
Well, the sequel is like 8 weeks later, we're at the Smithsonian for the awards. And I got invited because I was the nominator. And I think I was ACM president at the time or something. I don't know how I was there. But anyway, the point is, I'm sitting at a table with Vint Cerf and Glenn, and Glenn's 4 children. His wife had passed away by then. And he's basically non-communicative, as you noted. Okay. time comes for his award. He walks to the podium, and in perfect pronunciation, he gave a 4-sentence lecture.
Wow.
And none of his kids knew had done it. And he had gone to a speech therapist after he got the call, worked in private for 8 weeks to be able to say 4 sentences. And they start crying, and Vint writes me $100,000 check and said, start a chair at UCSB in this guy's name. I mean, so that's a testament to the man that he was.
Absolutely. And he was fantastic. And he also, so I saw some guy who was doing a write-up on the history of the ARPANET, and I complained because he didn't mention Glenn Culler at all. And his comment was something like, "Who is he? I know everybody that had anything to do with the ARPANET, and I never heard the name Glenn Culler." So, and I think that's sad. First of all, it's your typical know-it-all who isn't really a know-it-all.
Right.
Gives the bad press. But Glenn should get a lot more credit. I remember those monthly meetings, and Glenn would sit down next to some graduate student and log on and hack code to make things work. And every project, you need somebody who can sit down and make things work.
Well, and that's why they were one of the 4 nodes, is because, the wire ran right by there, and he said, we're going to tap in. They weren't invited in. He tapped in.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I thought that, so I knew the reason why Santa Barbara was one of the 4 nodes was because of Glenn, but I did not realize that he was the reason, rather than somebody recognized that having Glenn as one of the 4 nodes was a win.
No, he was the guy.
By the way, I usually stump people with this question. Why was Utah one of the 4 nodes?
Why was Utah one of the 4 nodes? Well, I am not sure, but I would imagine it had to do with Sutherland. But
no, well, Sutherland was so sure. So Sutherland made it easy to make it Utah, but there was a more prevailing reason that has nothing to do with Sutherland.
Was that the Army base there?
Nope.
It wasn't Dave Evans.
Ha! So I'm going to stump you on this one also.
Yep.
Usually when I ask the question, I do it a little differently. I say, what were the 4 nodes and what was the reason for each of the 4? But I jumped over that other stuff. I'm assuming you know why SRI and UCLA. But SRI, UCLA, and Santa Barbara are all in California. And they wanted a network to be across the country. And as soon as you go across the country, the federal regulations kick in. And so they needed to find a site that was outside of California. And back in those days, Utah was the closest site. And those 50 kilobit lines that they were using for transmission were very expensive. So, yeah, they could have done MIT, they could have done NSF, they could have done any one of those places. But Utah's a hell of a lot closer to California than any of them. And so apparently that was the reason they picked Utah.
So did Bob Taylor do that, or Licklider, or who did that?
So that's a good question. I do not know. Maybe it may have even come from some general who worried about the cost of the network. The issue of money was very important back then. In fact, the Army was the first agency to be monitoring it, which is why I got involved, because I was in the Army, and they wanted somebody in the Army who seemed to have credentials, and they figured that because of my schooling, I had credentials. The reality was I knew nothing about communications, but I don't know. So Licklider, I guess you know very well. Licklider predated Taylor with respect to the activity there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was neither one of them.
Well, it might have been Eric Roberts too.
So in fact, there's another guy who I don't think gets Larry Roberts doesn't get the credit that I think he deserves.
It well could have been Larry, as I think about it, just for who was doing what back then. I could be wrong.
So I got involved with it during my 2 years, and I guess it was 1967, I guess, when I got this call to come up to the Pentagon and, talk to Larry Roberts. But he had a lot. He was responsible for a lot of it actually happening. Taylor was incredible getting these people to actually work together. You had a prima donna at every one of those sites.
Yeah, exactly.
And to get them to work together was something else.
Well, then you wound up over at Berkeley. You mentioned also working with Al Despain.
Yeah, so how'd that happen? So I ended up being denied tenure at North Carolina State University because I got a big mouth and I won't shut up. I say it like I see it, and it gets me into trouble all the time. So I took the job at San Francisco State to build a computer science department, which that was like in 80 what? No, 70. Hi. Why am I not remembering? 83 maybe? I don't know. Anyway, no. I can't remember the years anymore. I am getting old. And then I got an invitation to teach at Berkeley. And so I left San Francisco State to go to Berkeley after developing the computer science department, and connected with Al. Al was great, actually. Al could talk at a high level, but if you needed to really understand it at the low level, he was absolutely fantastic to be able to bring the conversation down to the lowest level that he needed to in order to get you to understand. And the two of us did the Aquarius project, which was a Prolog machine. I was pretty much the microarchitect, and he was pretty much the ISA guy and organizing the work in Prolog to run on the machine.
Well, the reason I ask is he's another name that you don't hear very often in history. And I thought he was a pretty capable fellow.
He was a very capable fellow. He was, a lot of the people at Berkeley didn't like him for some reason, but I blame them, not him, because I always found him to be fair and also to be bright and willing to go out of his way to help people. But he certainly didn't toot his own horn. So.
Okay. And that was didn't he put together the group that had Carlos Sagan and Dave Patterson in it?
I'm sorry?
I think he at one point did some work with Sagan and Patterson.
So, yeah. So it turns out that one of his inventions, he was a very creative guy. And one of his inventions was the X tree. And so Dave was a young assistant professor. And so Al was interested in nurturing him. So the first X3 papers he published with Dave and then Carlos Sagan. And then what they did is they went off and continued publishing without Al. So I'm not crazy about the way that played out, because it was Al's idea, and then the two of them just, left them, in the dust. And instead of continuing to work with him, they did their own thing. Dave formed a computer architecture group with a number of the faculty, Randy Katz, for example, who wanted to do the machine with an asynchronous bus because he figured that would make it faster. And I had to explain to him that no, if you want the bus to be fast, it has to be synchronous. And of course, you can't have too much distance for it to travel.
Yeah,
But
right.
asynchronous involves handshaking, and that's going to slow it down enormously. Anyway, then Al and I were doing our own thing, and we actually got funding from ARPA to form our own research group at Berkeley. In fact, when we went to ARPA to sell the idea, the guy in charge says, "How about if you guys join Patterson's team?" And he looked at us and he said, "I guess that's not going to happen." And Al and I said, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." And what he then said about Patterson's team, I should probably not repeat. And then there were two architecture projects going on at Berkeley at the same time. Berkeley's W department was getting a lot of DARPA money at that time. Sue Graham was running the project, but there must have been at least a half a dozen. You know, Domenico was doing the distributed Unix. Stonebreaker was doing the Ingress thing. Al and I were doing our thing. Dave was doing his thing. The theoreticians very strong, you know, Manuel Blum, Dick Karp. And then the compiler work that Sue was doing. So Berkeley was very heavily funded from ARPA in those days. And they didn't like two architecture projects, but they knew there was no other way. So they funded both of us.
Was Dominic there at the time too?
Dominic Ferrari?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was doing the distributed Unix stuff.
Okay.
You know that Unix came to Berkeley because Ken Thompson took a sabbatical from Bell Labs and moved to Berkeley. And then the first thing he did was to bring up Unix on the VAX. The VAX was a new machine back then. And then he went back to Bell Labs. A guy named Bob Fabry picked it up, but I don't remember what happened to him, but he was gone like a year or two later. And then Domenico picked it up. And Domenico was pretty much the big operating systems guy for the activity going on at Berkeley at that time.
So Berkeley 4.2 came from him?
So that's a good question. So I wouldn't be surprised. So the real answer is I don't know. But if I had to make a guess, I would say it could have been any one of three people. It could have been Ken Thompson when he brought up Unix on the VAX. It could have been Fabry during the couple of years that he was there, or it could have been Domenico, and I just don't know.
And Bill Joy takes the credit for it.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Bill Joy was a graduate student in Fabry's group.
Okay.
And then he went with a bunch of other guys to spin off the Spark ISA at Sun Microsystems.
So you had a comment about a test that you had 3 questions. This must have been at Northeastern, I'm not sure. 3 questions, and you only could work one, and you wound up with a 40% on your test. And you thought you were all done in EE. Tell me that.
You really did pay attention to that video. So that's correct. So the first year at Northeastern, you don't do any engineering, physics, chemistry, math, that sort of thing. And then fall semester, your sophomore year, is when the engineering starts. And the first midterm had 3 questions. And one of them I got, one of them I piddled at, and one of them I didn't even touch. And so I knew I flunked. And so what did I do? I didn't even want to go back and pick up the exam. That's how unhappy I was. And my buddies said, at least let's go back and pick up our exams. So we did. And you're right, I got a 40. I got 33 points for the one I hit. I got 7 points for the one I fiddled. And I got 0 points for the one I didn't touch. And the professor says anything over 25 is an A. So after class, I asked him, I said, how can that be? He says, well, what engineers do is solve problems that they haven't seen before. And I want to be sure you guys can do that. So I give you some problems you haven't seen before. I don't expect you to get them all, but if you don't get any of them, then you're in trouble. So 40 was an A. And I guess I did okay. I did not drop out after the first midterm.
Well, I have an equivalent story, and it concerns Al Despain. So I was off campus and married and working 40 hours a week, and you had to enroll full time at Caltech. So I'm taking 18 units and doing 40 hours of work. So I'm really not too much in class, and I go into the final for EE1, and they introduced a transistor on the exam, and no one in the class knew what the hell a transistor was. We're just supposed, it's an RLC circuits course, right?
Right.
And at the end of 2.5 hours, I had an empty blue book, and all of a sudden I kind of saw one problem and I solved it. And I talk about piddle. I maybe wrote down the name of the next problem, and I got a 21 out of 100. And I knew the same thing as you. I'd flunked out of what was going to be my major, I thought, and I didn't go back for 2 weeks. This was end of the semester, end of the year, and went back, and it turned out the highest grade in the class, and I believe it was Despain, was 22.
Huh.
I was 21, and there was nobody else above 15. And that got me into Carver Mead's graduate class as a senior. But
so that is very good, and it really proves the point. By the way, this notion of introducing the transistor on an exam, I think, is a brilliant idea. It happened to me when I was a sophomore. The professor introduced the Laplace transform on the exam.
Okay. Sure.
And we'd never talked about Laplace transform before the exam. And that's good. Makes the exam a learning experience. And I've tried to do that sort of thing, not as successfully as both the guy at Caltech or the guy at Northeastern. But I think that's a great way to teach.
Well,
introduce new material that they have to struggle with, but you've given them enough that if they keep trying to hack at it, they can eventually break it.
Well, I couldn't help imagining we'd had some parallel universes here. Tell me a little bit about, you said in terms of mentors that Bill Linville was instrumental for you.
So Bill Linville is the professor who taught me how to be a professor.
Okay.
Bill Linville was all about the students. Bill Linville's, so there are actually probably 3 professors that really had a lot to do with making me where I am today, I guess. First was Ron Scott, my undergraduate dean at Northeastern, who saw something in me and opened doors for me that other people worked hard to shut. Again, because I speak my mind and I say it like I see it, and a lot of people can't handle that. But Ron Scott could, and he went out of his way to make sure that I was able to succeed. Another guy was Don Epley, who's the reason why I moved from electromagnetics to computers. And Epley's office was next door to Bill Linville's office. And somehow I connected with Bill and did a individual study with him. And that made it even better that I could see the dimension of the man. It was all about how can I provide better for the students and not about himself. And I did the individual study. I then took his 2-quarter. Stanford's I think they still are actually on the quarter system.
Yeah.
And I took his 2-quarter systems analysis course, and I've admired him, all these years. He died much too young, by the way. I think he was in his early 60s when he passed away.
Yeah, I'd heard that he died in a swimming pool. Is that true, or do you?
That I don't know. I did stay in touch with him after I graduated. In fact, when he started that engineering economic systems program, which still exists at Stanford today under a different name, but I asked him if I could come over and work for him in that department, and he said, "After you graduate, we'll talk about it. But right now, you're a PhD student in EE. I've got a new department. I have no idea whether it's going to succeed or not. And you passed the quals, which is a major hurdle at Stanford." And he said, "I'm not going to let you give that up to take a chance on my engineering economic systems program. After you graduate, if you still want to come and work for me, then we'll talk. But not until I'm not going to let you give up this this thing, which is going to pay you big dividends in the future, having a PhD from Stanford in EE."
Wow. Sage advice.
That was Bill.
Yeah. Sage advice.
Yeah.
And
but he was always like that, with everybody. And I had a couple of meetings with him years later, after I graduated, after I got out of the Army. And he was always, "How can I be of help to you?" It was never about himself. So, no, there's no question in my mind that he was the strongest mentor as far as influence on my career. These other two guys, Don Epley and Ron Scott, also deserve a lot of credit. But Bill Linville was absolutely number one. By the way, I've written a freshman textbook, and then the acknowledgement, the last acknowledgement I say, and I want to acknowledge Bill Linville, the professor who taught me how to be a professor. And it's been more than 50 years now since, when was I in his class? 1963, I guess. Yeah, so it is. Wait a minute, it's 63. It's 60 years now.
Yeah, holy smokes.
Right, 63, 73, 83, 93, 03, 13, 23. Yeah, it's 60 years since I was in his class. But I remember the example that he set even to this day.
We might have been in the same class. I'm just trying to remember. 63 is when I was at Stanford. And I had one class with Bill, and I had, and then the next year I encountered John, and they were unlike each other.
Were they ever unlike each other? Yeah, hard to believe that they were twins. Yeah, so the class met at 7:30 in the morning.
I wasn't in it, no.
Yeah, and I really have a problem with mornings. In fact, 7:30 in the morning, I am usually sound asleep. In fact, I'm usually sound asleep until noon, because I don't go to sleep until like 5 or 6 in the morning. But I wanted to take the course, and it was a 2-quarter course. And the first quarter, I couldn't get up. And I ended up with a C in the course. And the second quarter, one of my buddies, in fact, one of my best buddies in graduate school, maybe you know him actually. His name is Gil Masters.
Oh, yeah.
So Gil and I worked for the same professor, Dick Matson, and Gil said, "You need to come to class. So I'll make a bet with you that every day, every class at 7:30, we'll see if the two of us are there. And if one of us is not there, the other one gets a point. And at the end of the quarter, whoever has the more points wins." And the bet was like $5. And that actually did it. I came to class every day on time. And I was actually a resident assistant in one of the undergraduate dorms. So coming to class was just walking across campus from the dorm to the classroom. And Gil lived off campus, so he had to drive in. And the day before the last class, 7:30, Gil's not there. So now I win because we agreed that if it was a tie, I would win. And what happened? His car wouldn't start.
I love it.
Yeah. In fact, I should look up Gil. I haven't seen Gil in a long time.
Good. I haven't seen him in 50.
And I think he's still active, by the way.
Well, a lot of us are still active, you know.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of your students. I crossed paths a little bit. I was at Intel for a few years, and I got to know Jared Stark a little bit, and Rob Chappelle. I think Rob has moved on to Microsoft now, but
That's correct. Jared is still working for Intel. So both of them are tied for #1 among my PhD graduates, along with the other 34 PhD graduates. I have my own ranking, but nobody will ever know what it is. But both of these guys are both fantastic. Since you interacted with them, you know that.
Oh, yeah.
They were both Michigan PhDs, actually. And Rob actually finished with me at Texas. So when I left Berkeley to take the position at Michigan, I had 4 PhD students that were in progress. Actually, I had 6, but 2 of them were so early in the program that they really not needed to find a different advisor. 4 of them were doing fine, and I gave them the option of either finding another advisor, moving to Ann Arbor, or staying at Berkeley and working with me. And all 4 of them took the option staying at Berkeley and working with me. And it turns out that cost them a couple of extra years as PhD students. It's not the same thing doing it remotely.
Sure. Well, and back then it was harder still.
I'm sorry?
I say today it'd be easier than it was then, because that.
Yeah, but it's still not good. You know, all this business of like what we're doing right now, if we were working on a technical problem, it'd be a lot harder.
Oh, yeah, no question.
So all 4 of them finished, but they all finished a lot later than they would have. 2 of them were 2 of my 3 students that did HPS with me, which is probably my biggest piece of work, my best piece of work. Mike Shebanow and Steve Melvin. When I left Michigan to come to Texas, I gave them two choices: come with me or find another advisor. And they all came with me, and Rob was one of them. And so he spent his last 3 years of his PhD program in exile in Texas, although there's no question that he's a Michigan PhD.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah. In fact, the Michigan-Ohio State game, he's there every year.
I have a grandson who was going to be an engineer, and he went to Michigan and flunked out his sophomore year, and it was like it crushed him. And so we don't talk about Michigan around our house.
Yeah,
But,
it's
a great place, I thought.
so it is, but being an engineer is not for everybody.
Oh yeah. Well, this kid finally went back in data sciences and picked up a degree, and he's doing well now. But it took him some kids just have to find themselves.
That's correct.
And
But you mentioned Jared and Rob; they're both absolutely first rate. But there are a lot of others. In fact, Wenmei Hu, for example, I don't know whether you know Wenmei. He retired from Illinois after 30 years. Now works for Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA. Owner Mutlu is probably the most productive computer architect out there these days. He's a professor at ETH in Zurich.
okay. Who's the fellow at NVIDIA you said?
Wenmei Hu, one of my Berkeley PhDs.
There's several people from Texas that went to NVIDIA. Bill Daly has spent time at NVIDIA. And
so Wenmei's not one of them. Wenmei did his PhD at Berkeley, took the job at Illinois, was at Illinois. He graduated from Berkeley in '87, and he retired from Illinois a couple of years ago, and immediately was picked up by NVIDIA.
Yeah, and Steve Keckler's over at NVIDIA.
That's right. So Steve Keckler, he's one of Daly's students actually from MIT.
Okay.
And he has been at NVIDIA now for a number of years. So I'm trying to think of any of my. So a couple of my PhDs, I try to not lose track of these guys. In fact, we have a reunion every summer in the Bay Area, which was actually last Saturday. And Mike Chevenow hosted it, and every year somebody else hosts it. And I keep track of most of the guys then. But I think maybe one or two of them are with NVIDIA now.
So you spent a lot of time and certainly created people who helped with the Intel architectures. What's the situation that NVIDIA has done so much better than Intel? It's kind of a surprising turn, isn't it?
So NVIDIA kind of lucked out. Well, so first of all, Daly is very, very sharp. By the way, so I just realized this. Chevenow actually spent a couple of years at NVIDIA and was the lead architect of the Fermi chip.
Okay.
And then he moved on. He's been with, I don't know, maybe more than half a dozen companies, and he did the K12 at AMD, and he did the Denali at HAL Computer, which is owned by the Japanese. And he did I forget the name of the machine, but it was at Cyrix. He's done a lot of them. And one of the chips he did was the Fermi chip at NVIDIA. Daly is very sharp. And the reality is that the NVIDIA architecture, the GPU accelerator, was a natural for machine learning.
Right.
And since the AI community has gone crazy on this machine learning thing, there's lots of demand for the NVIDIA chips. And so that's why, in my view, NVIDIA is, going to the moon in some sense.
Yeah.
Will it continue? Who knows? Intel, on the other hand, has had a string of incompetence running the place. And now they've got Pat Gelsinger in there, who's a solid engineer. So I'm expecting Intel to actually turn it around. Whether they do or not, of course, I have no idea. But Gelsinger is not like the predecessors that Intel had, who pretty much destroyed the company. A lot of guys retired. A lot of those guys, by the way, have gone back to Intel. Glenn Hinton is now on the Intel payroll. Chris Wilkerson is now on the Intel payroll. So a lot of these guys have gone back to Intel after Gelsinger came. So I wouldn't count Intel out quite yet.
Well, that's good to hear. I didn't have that information, and that's pleasing. I knew Pat fairly well, and I can believe that he would, put engineering back at the forefront. And I certainly agree the people in between were not exactly sterling material, kind of like Hewlett Packard after Dave and Bill were gone.
Oh,
God, talk about
right. Carly Fiorina, the CEO of Hewlett Packard. What a joke.
Now, listen, let me talk just a couple minutes about a couple of your awards. You got the Carl Karlstrom Award, which doesn't appear on your Wikipedia page, but to me is an award that some of the professors that get it prize it pretty highly because they value teaching. And I'd just like your opinion of it.
Yeah, so thank you for that segue. So I love teaching. Teaching is the reason that I have maybe had some success is there are 3 prongs: teaching, research, and consulting. Consulting lets you see problems. Research lets you solve the problems. And teaching allows you to put it into a framework where you can explain it to somebody else. So the best of all worlds is when you have all 3. If I had to give up 2 of them and only keep one, teaching is the one I would keep. Before research, before consulting. Yeah, teaching is great. You walk into a classroom, they give you blank stares, they don't understand, and at the end of the lecture, they're smiling and they've got it. Tremendous feeling. So, yeah, in fact, I didn't realize, so I guess I should tell you that my Wikipedia page, I guess unlike most people, I have nothing to do with my Wikipedia page. I didn't start it. I didn't add to it. I didn't do anything with my Wikipedia page. So you got to blame whoever it is that developed that Wikipedia page. No, I prize the Karlstrom Award. By the way, I knew Carl Karlstrom. He was the rep at Prentice Hall when I was a brand new assistant professor at Cornell.
Was that right? I'll be darned.
Yeah, and so I remember him coming into my office at Cornell. I was only there 1 year, and then I was activated in the Army, the war in Vietnam. But he came into my office, he goes to my bookcase, he sees a Prentice Hall book, he takes it out of the bookcase, slams it on my desk, and says, "Why are you not using this in your course?" He was a man of strong opinion. I wish you were alive today, so I could say, "Yeah, Carl," and I got the Carl Karlstrom Award. No, I love teaching. It's the thing that I enjoy most about my job. In fact, some people have said that if it wasn't for teaching, I probably would have retired, Most of my peer group retired when they were 65, and here I am, 84. So I could have retired almost, 20 years ago. But I love it, You go in there and you make a difference,
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just an amazing feeling when you see the light go on in the kid's eyes because he finally sees the solution,
The
So
other
that's
thing you
my
just,
comment on teaching and on Calstrom, and you're absolutely right. Those of us that, not every professor likes to teach, by the way. There are a hell of a lot of professors that hate it. And the only reason they do it is because they have to, but that's not me. And there are several others who've gotten that award that, feel the same way I do, that it's the best thing we do as a professor.
I love that perspective. So one other thing you described in the time with Derek was the how your heart races when you solve something. And I thought the emotion you described for him was just magnificent. Can you give voice to that a little bit?
Sure. So I don't remember what I told him, but when you're doing research, and by the way, this research, if you know that the answer to the research problem before you start it, then why are you wasting your time? It's not research. It may be product development, but it's certainly not research.
Right.
So when you're doing research, you're in unknown territory, and you're struggling with it. And as you get closer to the solution and you can see that you're really going to uncover something, your heart starts to race, and it's pounding like you wouldn't believe as you finally come to the realization that you've done it. You've uncovered new knowledge, and here it is. It doesn't happen every day. In fact, if you remember the interview, I said what I keep thinking I would do would be to buy a shovel, and at the end of the day, I would take the PhD student out to the backyard and ask him to dig a hole with the shovel, because he's worked all day and accomplished nothing. And now he digs a hole. I say, see, you've done something. And then the next day, he spends the whole day, he's accomplished nothing. So I take him out to the backyard and I say, okay, fill in the hole. And see, you've done something. But you really haven't accomplished nothing. You've really done things which make it so when the idea presents itself, all the days that you end up doing nothing will come together and produce that aha moment. And the heart races, then you solve it. In fact, I've often said that I did my PhD dissertation in one day. And what really happened, of course, was I didn't do it in one day. I did it in, the 4 years I was a graduate student. But I kept coming up empty and coming up empty and coming up empty. My second year in graduate school, I proved a theorem it wowed everybody. But my advisor said, you're not a math major, you're a double E. This is nice, but you're not getting a PhD for this. And then I went through this dry spell where I wasn't accomplishing anything. And then one day in my fourth year, I had lunch at Treseder, the student union at Stanford, and then went back to my office and sat down. This was before we had all these simulations that did all the work for you. Everything was pencil and paper. And I tried something and it worked. And I tried something else and it worked. And I kept at it and everything worked. I sat down at 2 p.m. I finally put the pencil down at noon the next day. I did it. I wrote my dissertation effectively in one day. I went to my advisor's office. He's sitting there working, doors open. I walked in. I erased his blackboard. I took the piece of chalk and I started lecturing. He looked up and he stayed looked up. And I spent 2 hours going over everything that had worked the night before. And then 2 hours later, I put my chalk down and looked at him. And he said, you're done. Write it up in a clean way and I'll sign it. So that's what research is all about. And it does not happen every day. I've been lucky. It's probably happened to me maybe 4 or 5 times in my lifetime. but when it happens, there is nothing like it.
I love it. Great story. Thank you for sharing that one. This has just been incredible, Yale. I really appreciate your energy and your enthusiasm and your perspective.
When the energy ends is when I retire.
What should I be asking that I didn't ask?
I don't know. That's your job. My job is just to answer. So I'm glad that I did tell you about Linville and Ron Scott and Don Epley. I'm glad I mentioned some of my PhD students. I could go through the list of 36. I actually did that once in the presentation of one of the awards. I said, I owe it all to my students, and let me describe them to you. And I went through, I think I had about 25 PhDs at the time, and I went through and described the thesis of every one of them. Having a PhD student is really more than just a 4-year or 5-year or a 7-year commitment to me. So I think I've pretty well covered everything. I'm not ready to quit yet. I'm not happy with the attitude at most universities these days, where they keep on raising the salaries of vice presidents. And the first thing a new vice president does is hires 3 or 4 assistant vice presidents. And the tail seems to be wagging the dog. But the part that I do, I love, and I hope to be able to continue to do it. You never know, life is fragile, but as long as I can, I hope to continue.
Well, you've done a fantastic job, and your reputation is sterling. So I just want to thank you for your time today. And what I will do with this is get you a transcript in due course. Sometimes due course is a while out, but this is fabulous. And want to hope you have a great rest of the week. And thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Chuck. In fact, the pleasure spending the time with you and getting to know you. I've known your name for a lot of years, but now I know more than that, and I appreciate that opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. So take care and thanks.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.